The rain pelted against the windshield of Sophia Reeves's rental car as she navigated the narrow roads of Pinewood Valley, a secluded rural community nestled in the Appalachian foothills. The wipers struggled against the downpour, creating a hypnotic rhythm that matched her racing heartbeat. The GPS signal had disappeared 20 minutes ago, leaving her with nothing but a crumpled paper map and the vague directions from the last gas station attendant who had eyed her press credentials with suspicion. Just another mile down, where the oak trees bend over the road like they're whispering secrets, he had said, his weathered face betraying no emotion. Can't miss the turn to Crescent Hill, though most folks try to. Sophia adjusted her rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of her tired eyes. At 32, she had spent the last decade chasing stories across the country for the National Investigator, a publication that had once been respected for its hard-hitting journalism before declining into sensationalism. This assignment felt like her last chance to reclaim her professional integrity, to uncover the truth behind a controversial horror film that had become an unexpected box office sensation. Harvest Home depicted a rural community harboring dark secrets, where outsiders who discovered the truth met tragic ends. What made the film remarkable wasn't its plot, but the director's claim that it was based on real events that occurred in Pinewood Valley in the 1970s. The film had sparked outrage among the locals, who claimed it misrepresented their community and revived painful memories of a tragedy that had nearly destroyed the town. The rain eased as Sophia spotted the bent oak trees, their massive trunks creating a natural archway over the road. She turned onto a gravel path that wound up a gentle slope, leading to a collection of buildings that comprised the heart of Crescent Hill. The town looked like a postcard from another era, a main street lined with a hardware store, a diner, a small library, and a church with a white steeple reaching toward the clouds. Sophia parked in front of the Pinewood Inn, a two-story Victorian building with a wraparound porch. As she stepped out of the car, she noticed several locals watching her from the diner across the street, their faces a mixture of curiosity and wariness. She grabbed her suitcase and laptop bag, then made her way to the entrance, where a hand-painted sign welcomed visitors. The inn's reception area was warm and inviting, with wooden floors that creaked beneath her feet and walls adorned with black and white photographs of the town through the decades. Behind the counter stood an elderly woman with silver hair pulled into a neat bun, her sharp blue eyes assessing Sophia with undisguised interest. "You must be the journalist from the city," she said, her voice carrying a slight southern drawl. "I'm Martha Kingsley, owner of this establishment for the past 40 years. Sophia extended her hand. "Sophia Reeves. Thank you for accommodating me on such short notice." Martha's handshake was firm. "We don't get many visitors these days, especially since that dreadful movie came out. I suppose you're here about that." "I am," Sophia admitted. "I'm trying to understand the real story behind the film. Separate fact from fiction." Martha's expression darkened. "Fiction would be a kindness. What that man did was take our tragedy and twist it into something unrecognizable for profit." She reached for a key hanging on the wall. "Room 7, at the end of the hall upstairs, has a nice view of the valley. Breakfast is served from 6 to 9. As Sophia climbed the creaking staircase, her phone vibrated with an incoming call. It was Jason Foster, the director of Harvest Home, and the other reason she had come to Pinewood Valley. "Please tell me you've arrived in that godforsaken place." Jason's voice was tense, lacking the arrogance she had observed in his television interviews. "Just checked into the inn," Sophia replied. "The locals already seem to know why I'm here." "Small towns, no secrets," Jason said with a nervous laugh. "Listen, I'll meet you tomorrow at the diner, 9 o'clock. There are things about this town you need to understand before you start asking questions." "Like what really happened in 1974, Sophia pressed. "The incident that inspired your movie?" There was a long pause. "That's just it, Sophia. I'm not sure anymore what really happened. The research I did, the stories I collected, they don't add up. And since the film's release, I've been receiving these strange letters, photographs." His voice trailed off. Are you saying you fabricated the story? Sophia felt a surge of disappointment. No, Jason replied firmly. Something happened here. Something that changed this town forever. But I think I got it wrong. And the people who know the truth, they're afraid of it coming to light. After ending the call, Sophia unpacked her belongings and set up her laptop on the small desk by the window. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the setting sun cast long shadows across the town. She opened her research file, reviewing the notes she had compiled about Pinewood Valley and the events of 1974. The official record was sparse. A dispute between local farmers had escalated, resulting in a fire that claimed 3 lives. The case was closed as an accident, but rumors persisted of cover-ups involving powerful local families. Jason's film had transformed this tragedy into a tale of ritualistic violence and conspiracy, enraging the community that still carried the emotional scars. Sophia scrolled through newspaper clippings from the era, studying the faces in the grainy photographs, faces that reflected shock and grief, but perhaps something else too, something that looked almost like guilt. A knock at her door startled her. When she opened it, there was no one in the hallway, but on the floor lay a yellowed envelope. Inside was a photograph of 5 young men standing in front of a barn, their arms around each other's shoulders, smiling at the camera. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, "The truth dies with us." Sophia felt a chill run down her spine, not from fear of the supernatural, but from the realization that in Pinewood Valley, the past was not simply remembered, it was guarded, and she had just received her first warning. The Crescent Hill diner hummed with morning activity as Sophia pushed open the glass door at precisely 9 o'clock. Conversations halted momentarily as locals took in her outsider status, then resumed at a lower volume. She spotted Jason Foster in a corner booth, hunched over a mug of coffee, his designer clothes and carefully styled hair marking him as distinctly out of place as she was. "You look terrible," Sophia remarked as she slid into the booth across from him. The director's face was drawn, with dark circles under his eyes suggesting sleepless nights. Jason offered a weak smile. "The creative process takes its toll." He pushed a manila folder toward her. "These arrived at my hotel room in separate envelopes over the past week." Sophia opened the folder to find more vintage photographs similar to the one she had received the previous night. Groups of young men, some in front of local landmarks she recognized from her research. One photo showed them at what appeared to be a high school graduation, another at a hunting trip, rifles proudly displayed. "The founders' sons," Jason explained, lowering his voice. "That's what they called themselves. 5 boys from the wealthiest families in Pinewood Valley. They were inseparable growing up, and all were present the night of the fire in 74. A waitress approached their table, her name tag reading Diane. She was in her 60s, with kind eyes that contrasted with her tight-lipped expression when she looked at Jason. "Coffee for you too, miss?" she asked Sophia, deliberately ignoring the director. "Yes, please," Sophia replied. "And may I ask you something, Diane? How long have you lived in Crescent Hill?" The waitress's eyes narrowed slightly. "Born and raised. 63 years in this valley. So you would have been here in 1974 during the incident?" Diane's hand trembled slightly as she poured the coffee. "We don't discuss that time with outsiders. That man," she nodded toward Jason, "he came asking questions too, but he didn't listen to what we told him. Instead, he made up horrible lies about our town. I based my film on testimonies," Jason defended himself, though his voice lacked conviction. "You based it on gossip and fear," Diane retorted. "You never spoke to Margaret Holloway, did you? The only one left who knows the whole truth." Before Jason could respond, the diner's door swung open and an imposing man in his 70s entered, accompanied by 2 younger men who bore a striking family resemblance. The room fell silent as they made their way to a table, the elder man's gaze locking briefly with Sophia's. "Sheriff Thomas Blackwood," Jason whispered after Diane had left, "and his sons, both deputies. The Blackwoods have run this county for generations." Sophia watched as the other patrons nodded respectfully to the sheriff. He was one of them, wasn't he? The founder's sons. The last one still living in Pinewood Valley, Jason confirmed. The others either died or left town. William Blackwood, Thomas's father, owned the land where the fire occurred. The official report claims it was an accident during a property dispute, but my research suggests something more deliberate. Sophia sipped her coffee, processing this information. And Margaret Holloway, who is she? The sister of James Holloway, one of the victims. She's lived as a recluse since the fire, in a cottage at the edge of town. I tried to interview her for the film, but she refused. Actually, her lawyer refused on her behalf, a high-powered attorney from Richmond, which seems odd for a woman who rarely leaves her property. After breakfast, Sophia and Jason walked down Main Street, their presence drawing curious glances from shopkeepers and pedestrians. The morning sun illuminated the quaint facades of buildings that had stood for over a century, giving no indication of the darkness that supposedly lurked beneath the town's surface. I need to speak with Margaret Holloway, Sophia decided, and I need to see where the fire happened. Jason hesitated. The Blackwood property is private land now, heavily patrolled. As for Margaret, he stopped walking, turning to face Sophia. There's something I haven't told you. The letters accompanying those photographs, they're from her. She wants to meet me, to correct the record, as she puts it. Sophia felt a surge of journalistic instinct. When? Tomorrow evening. Her lawyer arranged it. Jason ran a hand through his hair. I'm not sure I want to go alone. Then I'll come with you, Sophia said firmly. But today I want to do my own research. There must be local records, newspaper archives. The library, Jason pointed to a brick building across the street. It has a local history section, and the town hall keeps records of property disputes and deaths. But be careful who you talk to. In Pinewood Valley, family loyalties run deep, and everyone has something to protect. As they parted ways, Sophia felt the weight of unseen eyes following her. She crossed the street to the library, determined to uncover what had really happened in 1974. Not the supernatural horror that Jason had portrayed in his film, but the human tragedy that had scarred this community for generations. The library was a single-story building with large windows that filled the space with natural light. A middle-aged woman with glasses perched on her nose sat behind the circulation desk, regarding Sophia with open curiosity. "Good morning," Sophia greeted her. "I'm researching local history, particularly events from the 1970s. Could you direct me to those resources?" The librarian's expression became guarded. "Local history section is in the back room. Records from before 1980 are kept in the archive cabinets. You'll need to sign in." She pushed a logbook towards Sophia. As Sophia wrote her name and purpose, historical research, she noticed previous entries in the logbook. Jason Foster's name appeared multiple times over the past year, and beside each entry was a note in different handwriting. Monitored by request of town council. The back room was cool and smelled of old paper. Metal filing cabinets lined the walls, and a large table occupied the center of the room. Sophia began with the bound volumes of the local newspaper, the Pinewood Chronicle, starting with January 1974 and working forward. For hours, she immersed herself in the everyday life of Pinewood Valley from decades past. Church announcements, school achievements, local politics. In late August, she found what she was looking for. A front-page story about a tragic fire that claimed 3 lives on the Blackwood property. The article was brief, mentioning a dispute between landowners that had escalated tragically, but offering few details about the victims or circumstances. The following week's papers contained obituaries for the deceased: James Holloway, 27, Robert Chen, 26, and Daniel Martinez, 28. All were described as valued community members who had died in a tragic accident. There was no mention of an investigation or inquest. Sophia photographed these pages with her phone, then turned to the filing cabinets. In a drawer labeled County Records 1970-1979, she found property maps, tax assessments, and finally, a thin file marked Incident Reports 1974. Inside was a single-page report on the fire, signed by then-Sheriff William Blackwood. It stated that the 3 victims had trespassed on Blackwood property for unknown reasons, and that a lantern they carried had accidentally ignited hay in the barn where they were found. The report concluded that no foul play was suspected. What struck Sophia as odd was not what the report contained, but what it lacked. No witness statements, no forensic analysis, no follow-up investigation. It was as if the case had been closed before it was even opened. As she was replacing the file, a yellowed newspaper clipping fell from between its pages. It was from a Richmond newspaper, dated 1 week before the fire, with the headline, "Local Men Threaten to Expose Corruption in Rural Community." The article mentioned 3 unnamed whistleblowers who claimed to have evidence of illegal activities involving prominent families in an unspecified town near the Appalachian region. Sophia's heart raced as she photographed the clipping. Could the victims have been these whistleblowers? Had they discovered something that made them targets? "Finding what you're looking for." The voice made Sophia jump. Sheriff Thomas Blackwood stood in the doorway, his imposing figure blocking the exit. "We don't get many journalists in Pinewood Valley. Not since that movie stirred up old wounds." Sophia straightened, meeting his gaze. "I'm researching the events that inspired the film. I believe there's more to the story than what was portrayed on screen." Blackwood's expression remained neutral, but his eyes hardened. "That movie was a work of fiction, Ms. Reeves. The real tragedy was painful enough without Hollywood embellishments." "Then help me understand what really happened," Sophia challenged. "The official report seems incomplete." The sheriff stepped further into the room. 3 young men died in an accident on private property. Their families mourned, our town grieved, and we moved forward. That's the story. And the Richmond newspaper article, the one suggesting whistleblowers were about to expose corruption? Something flickered across Blackwood's face. Surprise, perhaps, or concern. "I'm not familiar with that article, but I'd caution you against connecting unrelated events to construct a narrative that doesn't exist." He moved closer, his voice dropping. "This town has suffered enough from outsiders' speculation. Mr. Foster learned that lesson too late. I hope you're wiser." With that he turned and left, his footsteps echoing in the quiet library. Sophia exhaled slowly, realizing she had been holding her breath. The encounter left her with a certainty. There was indeed a story here, not one of supernatural horror, but of very human secrets and the lengths people would go to protect them. As she gathered her notes and prepared to leave, her phone vibrated with a text message from an unknown number. "Margaret will see you both tonight, not tomorrow. 8 p.m. Come alone. The truth cannot wait any longer." The sun was setting as Sophia drove along a winding dirt road, following the crude map Jason had drawn for her. Tall pines crowded the narrow path, their shadows stretching across the windshield like grasping fingers. In the passenger seat, Jason fidgeted nervously with his camera. "Are you recording this?" Sophia asked, noticing the red light on the device. "Documentary footage," he explained, "in case my next film needs to be an apology." His attempt at humor fell flat, undermined by the tension in his voice. Margaret Holloway's cottage appeared around the next bend, a small, well-maintained structure with a stone chimney from which thin smoke curled into the evening air. A single light glowed from within, casting a warm rectangle onto the front porch. As they approached the door, it opened to reveal a woman in her 70s, her silver hair cut in a practical bob, her posture straight despite her years. She regarded them with piercing grey eyes that seemed to evaluate their every movement. "Ms. Holloway," Sophia began, "thank you for—" "Inside," Margaret interrupted, her voice stronger than her frame suggested. "Quickly, we don't have much time." The cottage interior was modest but comfortable, with bookshelves lining the walls and a fire crackling in the stone hearth. Margaret gestured for them to sit at a wooden table where 3 mugs of tea waited, steam rising in lazy spirals. "You," she addressed Jason, "took my brother's death and turned it into a carnival of horrors, demons and curses and rituals. Her tone was accusatory but controlled. The truth is horrifying enough without such embellishments. Jason set his camera on the table, still recording. I based my film on accounts I gathered from people who weren't there. Margaret cut him off. From those who benefit from the myth rather than the reality. She turned to Sophia. And you, seeking the truth for your article, are you prepared for what that might mean? Sophia met the older woman's gaze. I believe people deserve to know what really happened. Margaret nodded slowly, then reached for a weathered leather journal on a nearby shelf. My brother kept this. He documented everything they discovered, everything they planned to reveal. She placed it on the table between them. The night before the fire, he gave it to me for safekeeping. He knew they were in danger. Sophia's fingers hovered over the journal. May I? With Margaret's nod of permission, she opened the book. Inside were meticulous notes, newspaper clippings and photographs, a detailed investigation into what appeared to be a land development scheme from the early 1970s. The founders' sons, Margaret explained, weren't just friends. They were partners in a business venture to turn Pinewood Valley into a resort destination. They bought up land at deflated prices through intimidation and fraud, sometimes with the help of the local sheriff, William Blackwood. She turned several pages in the journal to reveal property maps marked with annotations. My brother worked at the county records office. He noticed discrepancies in property transfers, tax assessments that didn't match market values, permits granted without proper inspections. Robert Chen was an environmental scientist, she continued. He found evidence that the development would contaminate the local water supply. And Daniel Martinez, a journalist for the Richmond paper, was preparing to publish their findings. Jason leaned forward. So they were killed to prevent the exposé? Margaret's expression hardened. The official story was that they trespassed on Blackwood property and accidentally started a fire. But James told me they had been invited there by one of the founders' sons, someone who wanted out of the scheme, who was willing to provide evidence. Who? Sophia asked, her mind racing to connect the pieces. Edward Foster, Margaret replied, looking directly at Jason. Your father. The silence that followed was broken only by the crackling of the fire. Jason's face had drained of color, his hand frozen in the act of reaching for his tea. That's not possible, he finally managed. My father left Pinewood Valley before I was born. He never spoke about this place. He left the night of the fire, Margaret confirmed. The only one of the 5 who wasn't present when it happened. He called my brother that afternoon, arranged the meeting, promised documents that would corroborate their investigation, but he never showed up. Sophia watched Jason struggling to process this revelation. Is that why you came back to Pinewood Valley? She asked him gently. To understand your father's connection to this place? Jason nodded slowly. He died last year. Among his possessions, I found photographs of Pinewood Valley and newspaper clippings about the fire. There was a note, the truth needs to be told. I thought he meant... His voice trailed off. You thought he meant something supernatural. Margaret finished for him. It was easier to believe in curses and evil spirits than to consider that your father might have been involved in something truly terrible. So you made the film, Sophia realized. But you twisted the real story into a horror movie. I didn't know the real story, Jason defended himself. I interviewed people in town, but no one would speak openly. I found legends and rumors instead, stories about rituals in the woods, sacrifices for prosperity. It made for a better movie than a land fraud scheme. Margaret's expression softened slightly. Your father was the only one with a conscience, Mr. Foster. But his courage came too late for my brother and his friends. She pushed the journal toward Sophia. This is the real story. Not as exciting as your film, perhaps, but far more damning for those still living in Pinewood Valley. Sophia carefully placed the journal in her bag. What happened to the development plans after the fire? They proceeded, but differently, Margaret explained. Instead of a resort, they created an exclusive community, Blackwood Estates. The gated homes on the north side of the valley, built on land acquired through the same fraudulent means. The contamination issue was covered up with bribes to state officials. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching. Headlights swept across the windows as cars pulled up outside. Margaret rose quickly. "They've been watching me for years. Someone must have seen you arrive." She moved to a bookshelf, sliding it aside to reveal a narrow door. "There's a path through the woods behind the cottage. It leads to the main road. Take the journal and go, now." "Come with us," Sophia urged, but Margaret shook her head. "This is my home. I've stood my ground for 50 years. I won't run now." She pressed a key into Sophia's hand. "Safe deposit box at First National in Richmond, number 247. More evidence, copies of everything. The combination is my brother's birthday, August 24th. And as Sophia and Jason slipped through the hidden door into the cool night air, they heard a loud knock at the front of the cottage and a voice calling out, "Sheriff's Department! Open up, Margaret!" They moved swiftly through the dense underbrush, guided by the beam of Sophia's phone flashlight. Behind them, raised voices echoed from the cottage, though the words were indistinct. "We need to get back to town," Sophia whispered as they emerged onto a narrow hiking trail. "Get our things and leave for Richmond tonight." Jason nodded, his face still pale with shock. "I can't believe my father. All this time I thought I was honoring his memory by telling his story." "You still can," Sophia assured him. "The real story, not the horror movie version. The truth about what happened in Pinewood Valley and who was responsible." They walked in silence for nearly a mile before reaching the main road, where they had left Sophia's rental car hidden behind an abandoned gas station. As they approached the vehicle, headlights suddenly illuminated them from behind. "Don't move!" a commanding voice ordered. Sheriff Thomas Blackwood stepped from his patrol car, hand resting on his holstered weapon. "Ms. Reeves, Mr. Foster, I need you to come with me to answer some questions about your unauthorized visit to Margaret Holloway." Sophia's mind raced, calculating their options. The journal was in her bag, evidence that could expose decades of corruption and possibly implicate the sheriff in a cover-up of 3 murders. "We're leaving town, Sheriff," she replied calmly. "We have what we came for." Blackwood's expression darkened. "And what exactly would that be?" "The truth." Jason stepped forward. "About my father, about yours, about what really happened in 1974. "You have no idea what you're talking about," Blackwood growled. "Your father was a coward who abandoned his friends when things got difficult, and now his son returns to stir up trouble with lies and ghost stories." "Not ghost stories," Sophia countered. "Land fraud, corruption, and 3 men who died because they threatened to expose it. That's the story we're taking back with us, supported by evidence from James Holloway's journal and documents Margaret has kept safe for decades." Something shifted in Blackwood's demeanor, a realization that the situation had moved beyond his control. "You think anyone will care about ancient history? This town has moved on. We've built something good here." "Built on stolen land and covered up deaths," Jason replied. "My father may have been a coward for running, but at least he wasn't a murderer." Blackwood's hand tightened on his weapon, but before he could respond, another set of headlights appeared on the road. A state police cruiser pulled up beside them, and 2 officers stepped out. "Everything all right here, Sheriff?" one asked, eyeing the tense scene. Sophia recognized an opportunity. "Officers, we're journalists working on a story about historical events in Pinewood Valley. Sheriff Blackwood seems concerned about our investigation." The state troopers exchanged glances. "We received a call from a Margaret Holloway," the senior officer explained. "She expressed concern for the safety of 2 visitors to her property, a journalist and a filmmaker. That would be you." Relief washed over Sophia. Margaret had anticipated Blackwood's move and countered it with one of her own. "Yes, that's us. We were just leaving town to continue our research in Richmond." The confrontation ended in a stalemate, with the state police escorting Sophia and Jason back to the Pinewood Inn to collect their belongings, then following them to the county line to ensure their departure. In the rearview mirror, Sophia could see Sheriff Blackwood's patrol car trailing at a distance, like a predator forced to abandon its hunt. As they drove through the night toward Richmond, Jason broke the long silence. What happens now? Sophia gripped the steering wheel, her mind already organizing the article she would write. Now we tell the story that should have been told 50 years ago. Not a horror movie, but a true crime, one with real victims, real villains, and real consequences. And my father? Jason asked quietly. How do I reconcile the man I knew with the one who was involved in this? He tried to make it right in the end, Sophia reminded him. He couldn't save your friends, but he gave you the means to expose the truth. Maybe that's why he kept those newspaper clippings, not just as a reminder of his guilt, but as evidence for someone brave enough to use it. As the lights of Pinewood Valley faded behind them, Sophia felt the weight of responsibility that came with the journal in her bag. There would be no supernatural curses or demonic forces in her article, just the all-too-human capacity for greed, deception, and violence. And perhaps, in telling the truth, she could finally lay to rest the ghosts that had haunted Pinewood Valley for generations. The Richmond skyline emerged from the morning mist as Sophia and Jason approached the city after driving through the night. They had taken turns at the wheel, stopping only for coffee and to check that they weren't being followed. The journal remained secure in Sophia's bag, its contents now photographed and uploaded to her secure cloud storage as a precaution. First National Bank opens at 9, Sophia noted, checking her watch. We have 2 hours to kill. They found a quiet diner where they could review their plan over breakfast. The exhaustion of the past 24 hours had left them both drained, but the adrenaline of their discovery kept them focused. I've been thinking about the film, Jason said, stirring his coffee absently. How differently I would make it now, knowing the truth. Sophia looked up from her notes. Would you still make it as a horror movie? No, he replied without hesitation. The real story is a thriller. A conspiracy exposed by brave individuals who paid the ultimate price. No supernatural elements needed. He paused. I owe them that much, especially after what my father did, or failed to do. Your father tried to help them in the end, Sophia reminded him. That counts for something. The bank was an imposing structure of marble and glass in downtown Richmond. Sophia approached the customer service desk, presenting the key Margaret had given her and her press credentials. I need to access safe deposit box 247, she explained. I'm here on behalf of Margaret Holloway. The bank manager, a formal woman in her 50s, examined the key. We'll need verification from Ms. Holloway. There should be a password on file. August 24th, Sophia provided confidently, her brother's birthday. After confirming the information, they were led to a private room where the safe deposit box was brought. Sophia's hands trembled slightly as she inserted the key and lifted the lid. Inside was a thick manila envelope and a smaller, sealed letter with Jason's name written on it in faded ink. He stared at it in disbelief. That's my father's handwriting, he whispered, taking the letter with reverent care. The manila envelope contained exactly what Margaret had promised. Copies of property records showing the fraudulent transactions, environmental reports detailing the water contamination risks, photographs of the founder's sons at various meetings with developers, and most damning of all, a signed affidavit from Edward Foster dated the day before the fire, confessing his involvement in the scheme and naming those responsible for the intimidation tactics used against landowners who refused to sell. This is everything we need, Sophia said, carefully organizing the documents. With this and James Holloway's journal, we can prove what really happened. Jason had opened his father's letter and was reading it silently, tears forming in his eyes. He knew, he finally said. He knew they might kill James and the others if they went to the meeting. He tried to warn them by phone, but couldn't reach them. By the time he got to the Blackwood property, the barn was already in flames. So he ran, Sophia concluded. He ran, Jason confirmed, but not before seeing Thomas Blackwood and the others watching the barn burn, making no attempt to save those inside. He folded the letter carefully. He writes that he lived with that guilt every day of his life. That's why he kept the newspaper clippings, not as trophies, but as reminders of his failure. They spent the next several hours at a nearby hotel, organizing the evidence and preparing their strategy for going public. Sophia contacted her editor at the National Investigator, explaining that she had uncovered a major story involving historical crimes with present-day implications. This could be bigger than just an article, her editor had replied after hearing the outline. This is book material, maybe even a documentary, the real story behind the movie that everyone's talking about. By mid-afternoon, Sophia had drafted an initial article and secured a commitment from her publication for a major investigative series. Jason had begun conceptualizing a documentary that would tell the true story of Pinewood Valley, featuring the evidence they had discovered and, hopefully, interviews with surviving witnesses. Their work was interrupted by a news alert on Sophia's phone. Fire at historic cottage in Pinewood Valley. Elderly resident hospitalized. They looked at each other in alarm, immediately trying to call Margaret's number. When there was no answer, Jason searched for more information online while Sophia contacted the Pinewood Valley Hospital. Margaret Holloway was admitted with smoke inhalation, Sophia reported after speaking with a nurse. She's in stable condition, but under observation. The local news site says the fire is being investigated as possible arson, Jason added grimly. This is no coincidence. Sophia's phone rang, an unknown number with a Pinewood Valley area code. She answered cautiously, putting it on speaker. Ms. Reeves, this is Deputy Blackwood. The sheriff's son's voice was tense. I understand you're concerned about Margaret Holloway. I want to assure you she's receiving the best care. Was her house deliberately set on fire? Sophia demanded. There was a pause. The investigation is ongoing, but I should inform you that before she was taken to the hospital, Ms. Holloway made some concerning statements about you and Mr. Foster, coercing her into giving you private documents. She was quite distressed. Sophia and Jason exchanged alarmed glances. That's absurd, Sophia replied. We have recordings of our entire conversation with her. Recordings made without her consent. Deputy Blackwood's tone suggested this was problematic. In any case, I'm calling to let you know that we'll need those documents returned as part of our investigation. The documents aren't in Pinewood Valley, Sophia stated firmly. They're secure, along with copies of James Holloway's journal and Edward Foster's sworn statement about the events of 1974. If anything happens to Margaret Holloway, or if any attempt is made to suppress this evidence, it will all be released immediately to state police, the FBI, and every major news outlet in the country. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Finally, Deputy Blackwood spoke again, his voice noticeably less confident. I'm not sure what you think you have, Ms. Reeves, but dragging up ancient history will only hurt innocent people in our community. The only innocent people hurt were James Holloway, Robert Chen, and Daniel Martinez, Jason interjected, and now possibly Margaret Holloway. Everyone else involved made their choices. After the call ended, Sophia and Jason accelerated their timeline. They contacted a trusted lawyer Sophia had worked with on previous investigative pieces, arranging for the evidence to be secured with legal protections. They then reached out to state police officials about the historical case and the current situation with Margaret. By evening, they had set in motion a series of events that would ensure the truth could no longer be buried. Sophia's initial article would be published the following morning, with additional pieces to follow as the investigation developed. Jason had secured interest from a reputable documentary producer who specialized in true crime narratives. As they sat in the hotel bar that night, the weight of the past 2 days settled around them. Sophia nursed a glass of wine, reviewing her article one last time before submission. Do you think it will make a difference? Jason asked quietly. After all this time? Sophia considered the question carefully. For the victims' families, yes. For Margaret, absolutely. For Pinewood Valley, it will be painful, but necessary. Communities can't heal properly when they're built on lies. And for my father? Jason's voice held a vulnerability she hadn't heard before. Your father made mistakes, Sophia acknowledged. But in the end, he tried to do the right thing, and he left you the means to finish what he started. There's redemption in that. Jason nodded slowly. I've been thinking about my next film project. Not another horror movie, but something about whistleblowers, people who risk everything to expose the truth. I'd watch that, Sophia smiled. Much more compelling than fictional monsters. The real monsters are the ones who look just like everyone else, Jason reflected. The ones who sit on town councils and coach Little League and serve as sheriffs, all while protecting their secrets and power. The following morning, Sophia's article went live under the headline, The True Story Behind the Horror Movie, Murder and Corruption in Pinewood Valley. Within hours, it had been picked up by national news outlets, bringing attention to both the historical crimes and the recent suspicious fire at Margaret Holloway's cottage. State police announced they were opening an investigation into the 1974 deaths, now classified as potential homicides. The FBI confirmed they were examining the evidence related to fraud, corruption, and possible civil rights violations. Sheriff Thomas Blackwood issued a statement denying any wrongdoing, but announced his immediate retirement for health reasons. 3 days later, Sophia and Jason returned to Pinewood Valley, this time with a legal team and media attention that ensured their safety. They went directly to the hospital where Margaret Holloway was recovering, her room now guarded by state police officers rather than local deputies. You did it, Margaret greeted them with a tired smile. After 50 years, the truth is finally out. Because of you, Sophia replied, taking the elderly woman's hand. Your courage made this possible. And what happens now? Margaret asked, looking between them. Jason stepped forward. Now I make a new film, the real story this time. With your permission, I'd like to start with James Holloway and his friends, who they were, what they discovered, and why their memory matters. I'd like that. Margaret nodded, tears forming in her eyes. They weren't just victims or whistleblowers, they were good men who believed in justice. In the days that followed, Sophia continued her investigation, interviewing former residents who had been forced to sell their land, examining environmental data that confirmed the original contamination concerns, and documenting the network of influence that had protected the guilty for decades. The story grew beyond Pinewood Valley, revealing similar patterns in other small towns, where power and wealth had been concentrated in the hands of a few families willing to do anything to maintain their position. It became a case study in how rural corruption could persist when isolated from scrutiny, and how the truth, though delayed, could eventually come to light. 6 months later, Sophia returned to Pinewood Valley for the final time. The town had changed visibly. New leadership, increased transparency, and the beginning of a painful but necessary reckoning with its past. Blackwood Estates had been placed in receivership pending the outcome of multiple lawsuits, and a memorial was being planned for the 3 men who had died trying to expose the truth. Sophia stood at the site where the barn had once stood, now an open field with wildflowers growing among the grass. Jason was filming nearby, capturing footage for his documentary, which had evolved into a powerful examination of small-town corruption and the human cost of silence. Was it worth it? Jason asked, joining her as the sun began to set over the valley. All of this? Sophia thought about Margaret Holloway, now living with her niece in Richmond, finally free from the shadow that had hung over her life. She thought about the families of James, Robert, and Daniel, who had at last received acknowledgement of what had been done to their loved ones. She thought about the residents of Pinewood Valley, now facing the difficult process of rebuilding their community on a foundation of truth rather than secrets. Yes, she answered simply, the truth is always worth it, no matter how long it takes or how difficult it is to face. As they walked back to their vehicles, Sophia reflected on how different the real story had been from the supernatural horror that Jason had initially created. There had been no curses, no ancient evils, no malevolent spirits, just human beings making choices driven by greed, fear, and the desire for power. And in the end, that was the most important lesson. The most terrifying stories weren't about monsters or demons, but about the darkness that could exist in ordinary people, and the courage required to bring that darkness into the light.